Beneath the relentless blaze of the Egyptian sun, the land stretched wide and golden, shimmering like a body trembling under the caress of heat. The Nile's waters flowed with a slow, languid rhythm, as if breathing life into the dry skin of the earth. Its banks, lined with fertile abundance, bore witness to the prosperity of humankind, who flourished under the gaze of their gods. The people built temples that rose like stone hymns toward the heavens, their chants filling the air with devotion and pride. Yet pride, unchecked, can shift like sand beneath the wind, and devotion can easily slide into arrogance. And arrogance, in the presence of gods, was a dangerous perfume, sweet, intoxicating, and capable of awakening divine wrath. The ancients whispered that the gods were not distant, cold beings of marble and aloofness. They were passions incarnate, flesh of fire and spirit of storm, as tender as lovers and as merciless as predators. In this land, divinity was never an abstraction, but a living, breathing force with hunger, longing, and fury. To live beneath their gaze was to dwell in perpetual intimacy with danger. Love could descend like rain on the parched earth, or fury could scorch like the desert wind, leaving nothing but dust. The line between blessing and curse was as thin as the horizon at dusk, blurred and shimmering, never steady. It was within such a world that the myth of Hathor's drunken dance was born, a myth not merely of punishment and mercy, but of the fragile dance between desire and destruction, between ecstasy and ruin. To hear it is to step into the heat of the desert, to feel the sting of the sun upon your skin, to taste the copper tang of fear and longing mingled on the tongue. It is a story that hums with sensual undertones. For what is wrath, if not passion twisted? What is intoxication, if not the surrender of boundaries, the loosening of reason into rhythm and abandon? Humanity, emboldened by prosperity, had grown careless beneath Ra's eternal light. They spoke in whispers of defiance, hearts swelling with secret rebellions against the divine order. Their words were sharp as reeds, cutting at the authority of the gods. Pride, swelling and swelling, became a tide that reached the ears of Ra himself, the sun god whose golden eye watched without rest. For Ra was ancient, older than the sands themselves, and though his light gave life, he was not untouched by weariness. To hear mortals mock the very breath that sustained them, stoked within him not only anger, but sorrow, the ache of betrayal.
And so the atmosphere of Egypt shifted. The air, once fragrant with offerings of lotus and incense, grew heavy, almost trembling with expectation. Beneath the calm surface of daily life, there was a tension that coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. It was as though the land itself held its breath, sensing the gods' simmering unease. The Nile, generous in its waters, reflected the red of dawn more vividly than before, like a warning painted across the currents. Shadows lengthened, and whispers of dread spread through the villages. The gods were stirring. To speak of this myth is to enter a world where passion is never mild. The gods loved with intensity and punished with equal ferocity. Hathor, radiant and resplendent, was among those most dangerous, for she embodied both tenderness and terror, both sweetness and bloodlust. Yet before her presence emerges fully into this tale, one must linger in the threshold, the awareness that divinity could save or devour with equal ease. That awareness is the heartbeat of the myth, the drum that calls all who listen into its spell. Imagine, then, the desert at dusk. The sand cools, but the air still carries the warmth of the sun, like a lingering kiss upon the skin. The horizon glows crimson, as though the sky itself bleeds. A hush falls across the world, not of peace, but of anticipation. Humanity's whispers of arrogance, carried on the hot wind, reach the ears of gods, and the gods, like lovers provoked, do not forget. They burn, they ache, they respond. In such a world, every emotion is magnified, every gesture divine and dangerous. Here lies the essence of the myth's beginning, the fragility of balance. Egypt thrived because the gods allowed it, but the gods were not machines of order. They were beings of desire, volatile and sensual. The Nile gave life because the gods willed its floods, and the sun shone because Ra permitted its glow. But just as easily, the floods could drown, and the sun could scorch. The fate of humanity was tied not to logic, but to the moods of beings whose passions could shatter mountains or cradle a child with the same hand. And so, when arrogance spread like an unchecked fever among mortals, Ra's patience thinned. His heart, once expansive as the heavens, contracted with indignation. He resolved to act, to remind humanity of their place. Yet his decision was not born of cold calculation. It was born of wounded pride, of fiery longing for reverence, of the ache of a lover scorned. That is the thread that runs through this myth. The gods' emotions are not abstract forces, but intimate, sensual impulses, echoing the rhythms of human longing and rage magnified to cosmic scale.
What followed was not merely punishment, but seduction of destruction, a dance of fury disguised as love, a storm that bore within it the seed of ecstasy. Hathor would descend, her beauty cloaked in blood, her laughter sharpened into roars. She would embody the dual nature of passion, both gift and curse, both caress and claw. And humanity, trembling beneath her gaze, would learn that the price of arrogance was to be consumed by the very passion that had once nourished them. Yet, as all myths remind us, destruction is never the end. Within the heart of chaos lies transformation, and within the intoxication of wrath lies the potential for surrender, for release. Hathor's descent would not end in annihilation alone, but in something stranger, more intimate, more intoxicating. Through wine disguised as blood, through the red tide of intoxication, she would be softened, undone, returned to laughter and dance. What begins in rage would find its climax in sensual abandon, and the fate of humanity would turn not upon reason, but upon desire itself. The myth whispers even now, love and destruction are twins, inseparable. Desire, if unbound, can nourish or consume, caress or claw. And the gods, those mirrors of our deepest impulses, remind us that to live is to walk along a narrow edge where pleasure and danger meet. Egypt knew this truth, and in their myths they bound it in story, so that each retelling carries not only history, but a pulse, a heartbeat, a shiver of both fear and longing. As the story begins, imagine the world shimmering beneath Ra's eye, tense with expectation, fragile as glass under the weight of divine moods. Humanity stands bold, but the gods stir, and in their stirring, passion awakens. Hathor waits in the shadows of the myth, radiant and perilous, her laughter not yet heard, her dance not yet begun. The air trembles, the sun burns, and the stage is set. Desire and destruction coil together like lovers, waiting for the moment they will unfurl. And when they do, Egypt will never be the same.
The moment came when Ra's patience thinned like parchment scorched by fire. He who had watched over the world with steady light turned his gaze downward with weariness and hurt. Humanity's whispers of defiance had grown too bold, their arrogance too sharp, and though they were fragile, their voices cut like blades across his heart. It was not only anger that stirred within him, but the deeper ache of betrayal, for he had given them warmth, abundance, and life. What he received in return was scorn. That wound, sharp as a lover's rejection, became the seed of wrath. From this wound, Hathor was summoned. But it was not the gentle Hathor who answered, not the golden one who inspired joy and filled the air with the sweetness of music. It was her other face, the lioness, the blood drinker, the embodiment of passion sharpened into destruction. She descended like the sun at its harshest hour, blazing, merciless, her beauty terrible in its intensity. Where her eyes fell, hearts quaked. Where her roar sounded, silence followed. She was hunger incarnate, the embodiment of desire turned to fury, and the earth itself trembled beneath her stride. The people who had once whispered their arrogance now whispered in terror. They saw in her a vision too overwhelming to resist, too perilous to behold. She was exquisite, radiant, her body gleaming like burnished gold, her mane flaring like fire. But in her beauty lurked death, in her laughter lurked destruction. It was as if desire itself had been unchained, no longer gentle, no longer coaxing, but consuming. She longed not for embrace, but for blood, not for tenderness, but for surrender. Her wrath was intimate, for it struck not from afar, but from close, as though each victim was chosen, touched, and undone by her hand. And yet, even as fear spread, there was something seductive in her fury. To witness Hathor as Sekhmet was to stand before the edge of passion unbound. Her movements, though deadly, were graceful, a dance of power and violence, every strike a rhythm, every roar a note in a terrible music. She was destruction, yes, but she was also beauty, and to gaze upon her was to feel a terrible pull, the yearning to surrender to her, even knowing it would mean ruin. She was the paradox made flesh, the ecstasy of fear, the allure of danger.
Humanity fled, prayed, trembled, but their voices were drowned beneath the sound of her hunger. Blood spilled across the sand, and each drop seemed to feed her desire further, igniting her wrath into a deeper blaze. The Nile itself reflected crimson, as though mirroring her thirst. The desert winds carried the scent of iron and dust, and in that scent was both terror and intoxication. She drank of it all, each breath filling her with greater fervor. Her beauty became unbearable, her presence suffocating, for she was the embodiment of excess, of desire with no restraint. Ra watched, and though it was his command that had unleashed her, even he began to tremble at the intensity of her fury. His heart, already weary, felt the weight of what he had done. To awaken Hathor's lioness face was to awaken passion beyond measure, and once awakened, it did not bow easily to control. He saw not only the punishment of mortals, but the possibility of annihilation, of a world consumed beneath her hunger. But he hesitated, for even in her fury she was magnificent, and to watch her was to witness divinity in its most unbridled form. She was terrible, yes, but she was also sublime. And so the conflict deepened. It was no longer simply God against mortal, nor justice against arrogance. It became a battle of desire itself, the question of how far passion could reach before it consumed all. Hathor was not merely punishing humanity, she was intoxicated by the act, enthralled by her own power, her own beauty, her own hunger. Each moment fed her desire, and each desire fed her wrath. She was spiraling, caught in the ecstasy of destruction, unable or unwilling to stop. The people cried out, and in their cries was both terror and longing. For even as they fled, they could not help but look back, drawn by the strange pull of her presence. She was their doom, yet she was also irresistible. Their fear was tinged with fascination, their despair with awe. It was as if some secret part of them understood her, recognized in her the reflection of their own desires, that, when unbound, could wound as deeply as they could love. Humanity saw in Hathor's lioness form the truth they often hid from themselves, that passion unchecked can destroy as easily as it can create. The desert bore witness, the sand drank blood, the air quivered with heat, the horizon shimmered with dread. The balance of the world trembled, suspended between annihilation and transformation. Hathor moved through it all like a dancer on fire, each step both graceful and devastating, her eyes glowing with intoxicated hunger. She was not merely a goddess punishing arrogance, she was desire itself, unleashed, made flesh, undeniable and overwhelming.
And in that moment, the gods themselves grew uneasy. What had been summoned was no longer a weapon to chastise, but a force that might undo the very world. Ra, weary and wounded, gazed upon the earth and felt the sting of fear. He had wanted reverence, and in reaching for it, he had summoned excess. He had awakened a truth that even he could not easily bind again, that desire, once freed, answers only to itself. This was the conflict that now spread like fire across the myth, a conflict not only of gods and mortals, but of passion and restraint, of hunger and mercy. Hathor's dual nature had been unchained, and her lioness face drank too deeply of wrath. The gods whispered among themselves, asking what could halt her, what could soothe her hunger, what could tame passion when it had become intoxicated by itself. The answer was not yet clear, for the story had not reached its release. The air was still trembling, heavy with dread and allure. What humanity felt in that moment was not only fear of death, but fear of beauty too great to bear. Hathor's presence blurred boundaries, made every heartbeat a trembling between attraction and terror. The people saw her, radiant in her fury, and their knees weakened not only from fear, but from the unbearable weight of her allure. She was magnificent, terrifying, and irresistible. She was wrath and seduction intertwined, and her fury was not merely destruction, but a terrible form of desire. This is the heart of the conflict and the desire that fuels it. Hathor, intoxicated by her own duality, consuming all with both beauty and fury. Ra, weary and uncertain, realizing that in unleashing her he has summoned not order, but chaos. Humanity, trembling and awestruck, caught in the storm of divine passion, unable to look away from the terrible beauty that threatens to consume them. It is a conflict as intimate as a lover's embrace and as vast as the desert sky, a collision of longing and fear, ecstasy and ruin. And as the myth turns toward its climax, the question lingers like heat upon the skin. Can desire ever be restrained once it has tasted freedom? Can passion, once intoxicated by itself, be soothed, or must it run its course, burning everything until only surrender remains?
When Hathor descended in her lioness form, the world seemed to shudder. It was no gentle arrival, no whisper of divinity entering the earth, but a blazing plunge, like fire striking dry grass. The desert winds carried her roar, a sound both terrible and intoxicating, a vibration that reached deep into the bones of those who heard it. She was Sekhmet now, the embodiment of unbound passion, intoxicated with the taste of blood and the thrill of power. Where she walked, fear bloomed as quickly as flowers in the flood season, but there was also an unsettling beauty to her wrath. She was radiant, every movement alive with grace, every strike gleaming with divine precision. To look upon her was to feel both terror and longing, as though her presence demanded not only fear, but a secret desire to be consumed by her. The first cries of humanity rose across the Nile. Villages trembled as she swept through, her eyes burning like suns, her mane flaring with golden fire. The air thickened with the scent of dust and blood, and the earth itself seemed to echo her hunger. She was fierce, yet there was rhythm in her destruction,
an almost sensual dance in the way she struck, as though each act of ruin was a performance of power. Her claws, her teeth, her gaze, each carried a strange allure, a pull that was as irresistible as it was deadly. Yet beneath the roar of her wrath lingered the memory of her softer essence. For she was not only the lioness, not only the destroyer, she was also the goddess of love, music, and joy, the one who had filled feasts with laughter, who had drawn hearts together in sweetness and delight. That essence did not vanish in her fury. It was there, hidden, woven into every act of destruction. Her wrath was not separate from her love. It was its twisted reflection, passion inverted and sharpened into a blade. What she destroyed with intimacy, as though each act of violence was also a kind of embrace. In her eyes burned not only hunger, but recognition, as if the act of devouring was also the act of claiming. This duality made her terrifying, for she was not a distant enemy, but a presence that touched every heart in secret ways. Humanity fled her, but they could not flee the allure that clung to her. She was magnificent, the kind of beauty that overwhelms, that makes the skin tremble and the breath falter. Her lioness body glowed in the sunlight, radiant and terrible, her movements swift as storms. She was wrath, yes, but she was also desire itself, revealed without restraint. Those who looked upon her felt not only fear of death, but the unbearable weight of attraction, as though destruction itself had become seduction. The more she drank of blood, the more intoxicated she became. It was not merely an act of punishment, it was a feast, a revelry. Her joy was sharpened into violence, her laughter became a roar, and her dance was a frenzy of ruin. Each life she took fed her hunger, and each taste of power drew her deeper into the spiral of excess. She was caught between her two natures, yet in that moment the lioness had the upper hand. The goddess of joy lay buried beneath layers of bloodlust, drowned in the ecstasy of destruction. And still there was a strange tenderness in her violence. Her hunger was personal, intimate, as though she reached for each victim not with indifference but with passion. She was not a cold executioner, she was a lover gone mad with desire, overwhelming, consuming, unable to stop. This was her paradox. In every act of ruin there was also closeness, the intimacy of touch, the nearness of breath, the embrace of something greater than oneself. To be destroyed by her was not to be discarded, it was to be drawn into her completely, to be known in the most devastating of ways. Ra watched from above, his heart divided. He had called her forth, summoned this lioness to remind humanity of their place, but he had not foreseen the depth of her intoxication. She was more than punishment, she was passion unbound, and even he, the eternal Sun, trembled before her. He saw in her not only wrath, but the reflection of desire's endless hunger, and he wondered whether he had unleashed a force that could never again be contained. His command had awakened something primal, and now the balance of the world quivered on the edge of collapse.
The gods whispered among themselves, their voices rippling across the heavens. Some marveled at her beauty, others shuddered at her excess, but all recognized the danger. Hathor's duality was her essence, and in this moment she was devoured by one side of herself. If her softer nature could not be awakened, if her joy and tenderness could not be restored, the world itself would bleed until nothing remained. And yet to think of softening her seemed impossible, for she was radiant in her fury, glowing with a brilliance that drew even the gods into awe. Humanity, caught in the storm, prayed and wept, yet even their terror was not pure. There was fascination in their fear, a strange yearning in their cries, for deep within them too they understood the pull of desire turned destructive. They had known love that wounded, joy that consumed, longing that left scars. In Hathor's wrath they saw their own secret truths laid bare, magnified until there was no escaping them. She was not only their destroyer, she was their mirror, reflecting the parts of themselves they wished to deny.
The desert became a stage for this terrible intimacy. Sand darkened with blood. Winds carried her roars like songs, and the horizon shimmered as though aflame. Each act of destruction was both terror and spectacle, pulling every gaze toward her. The people could not look away, for to see her was to be bound by her, drawn into her spiral of hunger. She was unstoppable, radiant, merciless, and in her fury she blurred the line between ecstasy and ruin. Her desire to destroy clashed against the hidden truth of who she was. Beneath the lioness roared the goddess of joy, faint but present, a heartbeat still pulsing in the depths of her being. That heartbeat longed not only for blood, but for dance, for laughter, for music. It longed for release, not in destruction, but in ecstasy of another kind. Yet her intoxication with power drowned it, muffled it, buried it beneath the roar of her lion's heart. She was divided against herself, and in that division lay the tension of the myth. The conflict was not only external, it was within her. Hathor was both wrath and joy, both terror and tenderness. And in unleashing her lioness form, Ra had set her against her own essence. Every strike she made deepened her intoxication, but also pulled her further from the goddess she truly was. It was as if she were dancing on the edge of a precipice, each step closer to a fall from which there would be no return. Desire and destruction twined together within her, inseparable, overwhelming. And this is what made her unstoppable. She was not a being of simple vengeance, but of passion, and passion does not tire. It grows, it burns, it consumes until nothing remains. The gods looked on with fear. Humanity trembled in awe, and Ra himself faltered in his certainty. The lioness drank deeply of blood and power, intoxicated, radiant, her duality unresolved. Her joy slept within her, her laughter silenced, her music forgotten, yet it remained, hidden, waiting for the moment it might awaken again. Until then, the world belonged to her hunger. She was both the kiss and the claw, the embrace and the devouring. She was passion unrestrained, beauty sharpened into violence, love inverted into ruin. And as her dance of destruction continued, every heart that witnessed her felt the same question rise like heat from the desert floor. Was there any force strong enough to draw her back, to soothe her hunger, to awaken the laughter buried beneath her roar?
The gods, trembling as they watched her, knew that force alone could never restrain her. Hathor's lioness face was too consumed, too radiant, too intoxicated by her own hunger. To attempt to bind her by chains or strikes would only deepen her fury, sharpen her teeth, and make the desert flow with even more blood. They understood that what consumed her was not only wrath, but desire itself, and desire cannot be quenched by violence. Desire must be turned, redirected, seduced into a different rhythm. It was Ra, weary yet wise, who conceived the plan. If blood had become her feast, then let the illusion of blood be her undoing. And so the gods poured out rivers of beer across the land, staining it with pomegranate and herbs until it gleamed like crimson. It shimmered in the light of dawn, a tide of false blood that glowed with temptation. The desert floor became a canvas, painted with red, an offering not of flesh, but of intoxication. When Hathor arrived, her eyes burned with the same fire that had consumed villages and fields. She smelled the air, thick with the fragrance of sweetness mingled with the copper tang she craved. She saw the rivers of red, and her lips parted with hunger. To her, it was blood, abundant, overflowing, more than she could ever have dreamed. Her body shivered with delight, her lioness heart pounding with ecstasy. She bent down, and with a roar that echoed across the horizon, she drank. The first taste was strange, unfamiliar, but intoxicating. It was sweet, heavy, laced with warmth that spread like fire through her veins. She drank again, and again, unable to stop, consumed not by wrath now, but by the intoxication of pleasure. The beer filled her belly, her body, her very spirit, wrapping her fury in layers of warmth and haze. The desert no longer shook with roars of rage, but with her laughter, soft at first, then growing, spilling into the air like music. Her eyes, once burning with hunger, softened, gleaming with a different kind of fire. Her movements slowed, languid, as though her body had been claimed not by fury, but by ecstasy. She swayed, her hips moving in rhythm with some hidden melody, her hands tracing patterns in the air. The earth beneath her feet no longer shook with terror, but trembled with the rhythm of her dance. Her lioness form gleamed with sweat and light, her mane flowing as she spun and laughed, no longer the predator, but the lover of life itself.
It was the sensuality of surrender, the transformation of wrath into abandon. Her fierce energy dissolved into a haze of intoxication. Every sharp edge softened, every roar turned into song. She danced as though the desert itself was her partner, her laughter ringing like bells, her body flowing like the Nile at its most generous. The gods watched, their fear melting into awe, for she was still magnificent, still radiant, but now her radiance caressed rather than devoured. She had become joy once more, joy heightened by intoxication, joy that shimmered on the edge of desire. The turning point had come. Fury transformed into ecstasy. Danger melted into pleasure.
Hathor was still overwhelming, still larger than life, but she was no longer the lioness who tore the world apart. She was the goddess of music, of love, of dance. Her essence returned to its softer face. Yet even in her laughter there lingered the memory of her hunger, as if to remind all who watched that her duality could never be erased, only soothed, only swayed into balance. The red-stained beer flowed through her body like a lover's embrace, softening her roars into sighs, her claws into caresses. She lay back upon the sand, her limbs stretched, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of intoxication. Her laughter grew deeper, husker, spilling from her lips like wine poured into waiting cups. She sang in fragments, words lost in ecstasy, but the melody clung to the air, filling it with sweetness and ache. She was no longer destruction, but neither was she entirely innocent. She was passion tamed, yet not extinguished. Her body glowing with the heat of desire now softened into joy. The gods stepped closer, careful, reverent. They saw her eyes half closed, her mouth parted with laughter, her body gleaming with sweat and radiance. She was no longer a storm to be feared, but a vision to be adored, the goddess of beauty in her most vulnerable and powerful state, surrendered, intoxicated, lost in herself. They sighed in relief, for humanity had been spared, but more than that, they marveled at her transformation. For in her surrender she was more captivating than ever, embodying the truth that even the fiercest passion can melt into tenderness. And humanity, trembling, dared to raise their eyes. They who had fled her wrath now saw her as radiant as the dawn. Their hearts, still shaking, felt the weight of awe not only for her beauty, but for the reminder of how close they had come to ruin. They saw in her surrender the delicate balance of existence, how easily wrath could become ecstasy, how thin the line was between danger and pleasure. And though they were spared, they carried the knowledge that her dual nature would never vanish, that she could rise again as lioness if ever provoked.
Her dance slowed, her laughter softened, and she stretched across the sand as though cradled by the earth itself. Her body, once rigid with fury, now flowed like liquid, each gesture languid, each sigh drawn from the depths of intoxication. She looked toward the horizon, her eyes hazy with joy, and for a moment she seemed almost human, caught in the same pleasures, the same weaknesses, the same surrender that mortals knew. And yet she was divine, more radiant in her intoxication than any mortal could ever hope to be. It was not only beer that had undone her, it was desire transformed. Her hunger had not been denied, but redirected, shifted from blood to intoxication, from destruction to dance. This was the secret the gods had discovered, that passion, once awakened, cannot be silenced, but it can be turned, reshaped, made to flow in gentler channels. They had not fought her, they had seduced her, and in that seduction lay salvation. The desert, which had burned with fear, now pulsed with laughter and music. The wind carried her songs instead of her roars, and the horizon gleamed not with dread, but with beauty. The same sun that had witnessed her fury now illuminated her joy, and the world breathed again, trembling with relief. She was magnificent still, but she was no longer devouring. She was radiant, soft, intoxicated, a goddess wrapped in ecstasy rather than rage. The climax of the myth unfolds here, in this intoxicating release. The lioness dissolved into the lover, the predator transformed into the dancer. The danger was not erased, but transfigured, turned into a beauty that felt as overwhelming as her wrath, but infinitely more tender. Those who saw her would never forget, for they had witnessed the paradox of passion itself, that fury and ecstasy are twins, and that surrender can be more powerful than conquest. And so the world turned, trembling but alive, bound forever to the memory of Hathor's drunken dance. What had begun as wrath ended in laughter. What had threatened to devour became a celebration. Her duality had not vanished, but it had been softened, coaxed into balance through the intoxication of surrender. It was a release as erotic as it was cathartic, a reminder that passion, when unbound, may consume, but when redirected, may save.
Humanity had been brought to the very edge of annihilation. Their fields had burned, their homes lay in ruins, and the air still carried the memory of blood and ash. Yet now, in the silence that followed the drunken dance, they breathed again. They emerged from their hiding places like creatures who had survived a storm, blinking into the light of a world that felt miraculously alive. The people whispered prayers not of defiance but of awe, offering gratitude not only for survival, but for the revelation that beauty could bloom even out of terror. The lioness had softened. Her mane still glowed with power, but the ferocity that once blazed in her eyes had dimmed into a warmth that caressed rather than pierced. She lay in the sand, body gleaming, breath heavy from intoxication, yet in her radiance there was no longer the promise of destruction. There was something gentler now, something closer to the Hathor they had once known, the goddess of love, of joy, of music, of the tender sweetness of desire. Her laughter echoed faintly across the desert, no longer the roar of wrath, but the melody of a woman surrendering to her own softness. And yet, beneath that joy, lingered the memory of who she had been moments before. The bloodthirsty lioness was not gone, only sleeping. This was the truth the gods knew, and humanity too could sense it in their trembling hearts. The dance had spared them, the beer had soothed her, but the duality was eternal. The radiant goddess of love was also the fierce lioness of death, and both were her truth. To love her was to fear her, to desire her was to risk being consumed. Ra stood above it all, his gaze wary, the sun itself seeming dimmer in the weight of what had passed. He had unleashed her wrath, and it was he who had devised her undoing. The relief that now washed over him was tempered with a deep unease, for he knew how fragile the balance remained. one shift in her mood, one spark of arrogance from mortals, and the lioness could rise again. He looked upon his daughter with both affection and caution, knowing that she embodied the paradox of creation itself, love inseparable from destruction, ecstasy inseparable from wrath.
He sighed, and in that sigh was the sound of centuries of burden. He had watched over humanity since their first breath, gifting them warmth and light, and yet he had also witnessed their arrogance, their cruelty, their forgetfulness of the gods. In Hathor's rampage he had seen their punishment, but in her surrender he saw their salvation. The lesson was etched into the very air. Divinity is not tame, not predictable, and to live beneath it is to dwell forever at the mercy of moods as vast and shifting as the desert sands. The people gathered, some daring to raise their voices in hymns, others too shaken to do more than kneel. They praised Hathor in her radiant form, her laughter now filling them with reverence rather than terror. They called her Savior, even as they remembered her as executioner, for the line between those roles was as thin as a whisper. Their offerings were trembling but sincere, and the air shimmered with incense and song. Hathor listened, her body still languid, her eyes half closed as if caught between worlds. A smile played upon her lips, soft yet knowing. She accepted their devotion, but within her smile lay a secret, an awareness that their prayers were born not only from love, but from fear. And perhaps she relished that. To be adored because one is desired is one kind of power. To be adored because one is feared is another. She had both, and she would never relinquish either. The desert itself seemed changed. Where once there had been the cries of the hunted, now there was silence threaded with possibility. The winds carried the faintest echo of her dance, as though the land remembered the rhythm of her body, the music of her intoxication. It was a reminder, inscribed upon the earth, that destruction and joy had intertwined here, and the boundary between them would never again be clean. Ra lowered his head, his golden light spilling across the sands like a weary blessing. He understood what had been preserved and what remained at risk. Humanity would live, yes, but their survival was not secure. It was borrowed time, a gift that could be revoked if they again offended the gods, if they again summoned the lioness from within Hathor's heart. He felt the fragile thread of harmony and knew how easily it could snap. The outcome was relief, but not safety. Beauty had been reborn, but from chaos, and its roots were shallow.
The gods, gathered in cautious silence, looked upon their sister with new eyes. Some saw her return to joy as a miracle, others as a warning. They whispered among themselves, knowing that the duality within her was a mirror of their own natures. None of them were singular, none of them free from contradiction. Hathor embodied that truth more vividly than any of them. The divine could bless and destroy in the same breath. For humanity, the memory of her wrath would remain etched into their bones. Parents would tell children of the time when the lioness walked the earth, when the sky itself shook with her hunger. And they would also tell of her drunken laughter, her dance that saved the world, her beauty that shone after the storm. In this way, she became both warning and promise, adored for her tenderness, yet feared for her fury. Songs would rise in her name, both hymns of love and hymns of terror, each one a thread in the tapestry of devotion. Hathor herself rose slowly, her body swaying with the remnants of intoxication, her hair gleaming with sunlight. She gazed at humanity with eyes that were no longer burning but luminous. Her lips parted in a smile that could be read as either forgiveness or play. She stretched her arms as though embracing the desert, and in that gesture was both a blessing and a reminder. She was love, she was joy, but she was also the lioness who had tasted blood. That memory would never vanish. It lay within her like an ember, capable of flaring into fire at any moment. Ra watched her carefully, his heart heavy with the weight of knowledge. He had seen the limits of control. He had seen that even gods could be overcome by their own passions. Yet he also saw the beauty of her return, the miracle of laughter after terror, the gift of life restored. He would not forget her duality, but he would also cherish this moment, fleeting though it might be. For even gods need tenderness, and even wrath can be softened into joy, if only for a time. The outcome was not closure. It was balance restored, for now, fragile and shimmering like water in the desert. Humanity would live, the gods would breathe easier, and Hathor would shine once more as the radiant goddess of love. But beneath it all lingered the truth. Beauty is born from chaos, harmony from the edge of destruction. To adore her was to live forever in awe of that balance, trembling yet grateful, fearing yet desiring, knowing that love and destruction were never truly separate. And so the desert fell quiet, but not silent. It carried within it the dual song of what had transpired, roar and laughter, blood and beer, death and dance. Humanity looked to the horizon, humbled, reverent, alive. The gods looked upon Hathor, wary yet adoring, and Ra, the weary sun, shone down with fragile warmth, knowing that this peace, like all peace, was only a pause between storms.
Passion is never a gentle thing. It is a fire, and fire is both warmth and ruin. The story of Hathor's drunken dance whispers this truth across centuries. What nourishes can also consume. What saves can also destroy. To love her is to stand trembling at the edge of both ecstasy and death, uncertain which form her touch will take. Humanity survived not because wrath was erased, but because wrath was momentarily softened, transfigured into joy. And in that transfiguration lies the haunting lesson. No desire is ever harmless, no intimacy ever free of risk. Each glance, each caress, carries within it the weight of possibility, a tension that electrifies the heart and quickens the pulse. Hathor's myth is a mirror, reflecting our own deepest cravings, our own dance with danger clothed in beauty. Hathor is not merely a goddess of sweetness, not merely the gentle muse of music, dance, and affection. She is also the lioness, the fury of blood, the hunger that devours. To worship her is to accept that these faces are inseparable, two halves of the same shimmering truth. Her beauty overwhelms precisely because it hides the danger within. Her tenderness seduces precisely because it recalls the roar that might return at any moment. In her, love and death are not opposites, but reflections, echoing one another like shadows at noon. Every step she takes, every sway of her intoxicated dance reminds us that pleasure and peril are woven from the same golden threads, that the very things that lift us can just as easily break us. And is this not the essence of passion itself? To open the heart to desire is to surrender, and in surrender lies risk. We yield to the intoxicating pull of another, their touch both a promise of sweetness and a threat of devastation. We drink deeply, knowing the possibility of being undone, and yet we drink all the same. Just as Hathor drank the beer that mirrored blood, just as mortals trembled yet prayed to her, we too step willingly into the arms of passion, aware of its double edge. The danger is not a flaw, it is the very reason the fire feels alive. The fire of desire warms the soul, and yet it can also burn the flesh, leaving us scorched, trembling, desperate for another taste. It is in this trembling that we recognize our humanity, our hunger, our willingness to be consumed in the pursuit of rapture.
The myth lingers because it mirrors the deepest truths of human longing. To live is to crave touch, to crave recognition, to crave surrender to something greater than ourselves. Yet every craving comes with a cost. The same embrace that nourishes can suffocate. The same kiss that heals can wound. The same laughter that fills the soul can dissolve into the roar of loss. Hathor embodies this, not as contradiction, but as harmony. She is not divided between love and wrath. She is whole because she is both. To witness her duality is to confront the paradox within ourselves. The heart that loves fiercely is also the heart that can be broken fiercely. We recognize in the intoxicated sway of the goddess the mirror of our own desire, our own vulnerabilities, and our own daring to risk everything for fleeting beauty. Her drunken laughter, her languid dance, the softening of the lioness into the radiant goddess of love, these images haunt because they reveal the possibility of release. Even the fiercest passions, even the most destructive forces, can dissolve into beauty. And yet, that release is never permanent. The ember of wrath remains. The lioness is not slain, only sleeping. This is the paradox that unsettles us, even as it seduces us. Joy is fragile, harmony is fleeting. Love is always shadowed by its capacity to wound. Every human heart, if it beats with desire, knows the echo of this lesson. Every stolen glance, every whispered promise, every trembling surrender carries with it a shadow of the potential for ruin.
And it is precisely this shadow that makes the light shine so brightly. The story does not end with triumph nor with despair. It ends in balance, delicate as silk, trembling as breath. Humanity survives, yes, but only because the gods found a way to transform fury into pleasure. What a dangerous hope this offers, that even the darkest urges within us can be transfigured, that rage can melt into laughter, that desire can soften rather than burn. Yet it also warns us that this balance is never secure. Passion will always threaten to consume, even as it nourishes. We live not in safety, but in the shimmering uncertainty of desire. We navigate a world that demands we embrace both ecstasy and peril, that invites us to dance along the edge of surrender, trembling in the knowledge that the line between delight and destruction is thinner than we imagine. And so Hathor remains eternal. She lingers not only in the hymns of temples long buried, not only in the carvings of stone lions and radiant women, but in the pulse of human longing. Every time we surrender to love, we surrender to her. Every time we feel both joy and fear in the arms of another, we echo the trembling prayers of ancient humanity. Every time we taste the sweetness of passion and sense beneath it the shadow of ruin, we remember her drunken dance. Her presence is a reminder that life itself is a festival of contrasts, that the heart is both fragile and ferocious, that pleasure is inseparable from risk.
Her myth does not comfort us. It does not tell us that love is safe, that joy is permanent, that surrender is without cost. Instead, it seduces us with the truth that makes passion irresistible. Danger and pleasure are bound together, and it is their inseparability that makes desire so intoxicating. To worship Hathor is to be haunted, to live in awe of the fire that warms and burns, to adore the laughter that was once a roar. We are drawn to her not despite her danger, but because of it, because in that danger we find the thrill of being fully alive, fully seen, fully surrendered to the irresistible tide of sensation. Perhaps that is why the story endures. It does not resolve, it lingers. We cannot dismiss it, for it is too close to the truth of our own hearts. We walk away unsettled, but also seduced, drawn deeper into the mystery of desire. We remember that love, like the goddess herself, will never be tame, never be fully safe. It will always carry the possibility of intoxication, the sweetness of surrender, the risk of being undone. And it is precisely because of this that we seek it, again and again, despite the danger. Every heartbeat becomes a drum, every glance a call to dance, every brush of skin a reminder of the ever-present flame that Hathor embodies. Hathor, radiant and wild, lioness and lover, goddess of blood and laughter, you are the paradox we cannot escape. In you we see the truth of ourselves, tender yet fierce, capable of both ecstasy and ruin. Your drunken dance
is not only the salvation of humanity in a mythic past, it is the eternal rhythm of passion within every soul. We are haunted by you, seduced by you, forever trembling at the edge of your dual embrace. And as long as we long, as long as we love, we will dance with you still. Even as centuries pass and civilizations rise and fall, the intoxicated sway of Hathor remains alive in every whispered secret, in every stolen embrace, in every pulse of desire that rises unbidden and refuses to be silenced. Her myth teaches that to surrender fully is to risk, and that to risk is to truly live. We carry her in the beat of our hearts, in the warmth of our skin, in the tremor of our sighs. And perhaps it is this haunting memory, this lingering echo of love and fury intertwined, that ensures we continue to seek her, continue to honor the peril and sweetness of passion, and continue to dance.